What's going on, guys? Welcome to the circus, and today we're going to recover some of the things about the CV. We're not going to talk about masks, but you might see some pictures of them throughout. Those pictures are there just to remind my audience the only thing that I will say about them, and that's nothing is new under the sun. We've all been here before, and the more you look into 1918, the more striking similarities you see. But anyways, the first thing that we're going to talk about is the antibody studies that were going on largely at the end of April, beginning of May, that all came back showing around the same thing, and the news that came out attacking it immediately. So the first thing is that these studies were studying the seroprevalence of antibodies in specific locations in different states and countries around the world, which is just a big fancy way of saying that they're testing blood in various parts around the world for the antibodies that your body produces if infected with the CV. Now, we've already talked about the efficacy of these seroprevalence tests, basically these blood tests that are looking for the antibodies produced whenever you're infected with the CV. It turns out the antibodies are not that specific over this situation. So you may have pieces of antibodies in your system that are not from an infection with the CV, but rather maybe a possible infection with a CV. Because remember, this class of viruses is very common. I mean, so common that one of the diseases that these viruses cause has the word common in it. The common cold. Anyways, the first thing to hit the journals was a small study done out of Santa Clara, California. Now, notably, it was out of Santa Clara, California, because that is close to Stanford University, which published the study. But it was quickly attacked for having possible sampling biases, which anybody who follows my channel knows how funny that is, because this study, compared to some of the studies that the corporate media has thrown in our faces over and over and over again, is actually much more valid. My only problem with this study, in reality, is about the antibody tests themselves. However, the results found that a significantly larger amount of the population had been infected with the CV than previously thought. This is what we've been talking about on our channel for a while now, about the problem of the denominator. So when they're finding out the case fatality rate, for almost the entire time of this pandemic, they've been going off of how many people have died out of how many people have tested positive for the CV. Now, when we look at flu, we know that they say how many people have died, and then they do an aggregate number, because you can't test 60 million people, but you can do small sampling, and then you can infer from that how many people did get the flu that year. That's how they're doing it. So when you're talking about 100 and some thousand people have tested for the disease, they were not extrapolating that out to the American public at large, which was keeping the case fatality rate very, very high. These antibody tests were the first data sets that we had to come in that started showing, well, how many people really are infected with this and are asymptomatic or having very low symptoms, and what does that do to the case fatality rate? Then, of course, we all know that it lowers the case fatality rate. So what did they find? Well, they found a significantly larger amount of the population was infected with the CV than we had previously anticipated. However, not enough of people are infected with the CV to have us anywhere close to herd immunity. So it was a good thing, bad thing kind of situation. But when you look at how many people were infected that we previously didn't know about, it significantly started lowering our case fatality rate. And I'm going to make a mega folder that has all of these studies in PDF format, and I'll link it in the comments section below so that you guys can go through them in detail, because this video I'm going to try to make a little shorter so we can just cover more of the topic in a little bit less of the time. So the Santa Clara study found that in between 3 and 5% of the population has had the CV. This led to an antibody test that was done in Los Angeles County, California, which also found about the same results in between 3 and 5%. The same study was done in Geneva, Switzerland. 21% of people in New York City tested positive, and more than 6 times the people in Connecticut. You get the point. As these antibody tests were coming out, it was coming out that we were going to have to change the denominator. A lot more people had this than they had anticipated. So, staying true to form, instead of looking into it, they started attacking the studies and the tests themselves, which I've gone over. These antibody tests are not exactly perfect, but what we do need to look at, and what is impossible to ignore, is that all of these studies from around the world were all coming back with about the same amount of the population infected, as in repeatable data, which is important in science. It used to be. And so that was the counter that was provided. These serological surveys are showing that a significantly larger amount of the population is infected with CV than we initially thought. That's going to make our case fatality rate go down, so the corporate media focuses on the unreliability of the tests that are saying such a significant amount of the population is infected. At least until a month later, on May 28th, when Spain does their research, and they used an antibody test that the scientific community finally considered good enough. And what did the study find? About 5 or 6% of the population had the CV, which is the same data that we were getting from all the other serological studies. So generally, they're thinking in between 3 and 7% of the population in regular areas have experienced this bug. And in the hot spots, it seems as high as 21%, and some places even higher. Herd immunity would theoretically happen somewhere around 60%. And so where would we be closest to that at? Well, if you will remember, Sweden decided to go a different route. No lockdown, and I would think that that would be the best place for us to observe the disease in its natural course of spreading. So let's get into what they did in Sweden. The progress of the CV epidemic in Sweden and analysis. The course of the CV pandemic in Sweden is of great interest, as it is one of very few advanced nations where no lockdown order that heavily restricted people's movements and other basic freedoms was imposed. As there has been much comment, some of it ill-informed, on how the CV epidemic has developed in Sweden, but relatively little detailed analysis published in English, it is worth exploring what their excellent publicly available data reveal. Again, everything I cover in here, the links will be in the comment section below. Recorded new cases continued rising until mid-April, and after gently declining from then until late May, have doubled since then. All or most of that increase appears to have been due to a decision on the 5th of June to expand testing. By the end of June, testing was at double the rate in May, which in turn averaged approximately 25% higher than in April. Allowing for the increase in testing over time, the incidence of the CV appears to have declined by about 30% from mid-April until the late May, and has since remained broadly stable. Deaths peaked in mid-April and have fallen by 2/3 since then. It follows that the infection fatality rate has fallen substantially since early in the epidemic. So this is a microcosm of the problem that these fearmongers are being faced with across the country, and this chart perfectly represents it. If you'll look, everything involved in the CV is on the decline in Sweden. Until 28 May, what they said in the article, 5th of June, they did a substantial increase in testing. So you have the number of people in ICU going down, your total number of deaths going down. Literally every statistic around mortality surrounding the CV is plummeting. So what do? They increase the amount of testing they do. They go out into the asymptomatic population, the population of people who don't even know they're sick or are mildly sick, and they ramp up testing so that they can do what? Shift the focus from mortality to new cases. Don't look at how many people are dying, only look at how many new cases. And because of the serological studies that they tried to debunk and say weren't true, they actually truly know that the population at whole has way more infection than what they initially thought. So if they want to go out and find new cases, they can do that. The only problem is there is a finite number of people who are in the danger category for this disease. So no matter what they do in expanding testing and expanding the number of new cases, the number of deaths and ICU admissions are going to remain the same. That means that the overall case fatality rate has nothing to do but drop. Back to the article. The changing age composition of new cases over time is shown in Figure 2. And as you can see, as time goes on, the people who are being tested are getting younger and younger. The number of cases among people aged 70 plus has been declining since mid-April. Until the end of May, this more than countered gently rising infections in age groups younger than 60, with infections among 60 to 69-year-olds broadly stable. But since then, confirmed infections in people under 60 have rocketed, and there has also been a noticeable increase in infections among people aged 60 to 69. It is likely that the bulk of these increases simply reflect the widening of testing in June. The total number of tests in the latest week was double that of 4 weeks previously. The Swedish Public Health Agency estimates that the current reproduction number in Sweden during mid-June was approximately 0.9, implying a decline of about 10% a week in the true number of new infections. However, comparing figures 1 and 2 suggests that while infections in the oldest age groups are reducing steadily, this is being counterbalanced by an increase in infections among young people, resulting in little overall trend in the total number of infections. And I put figure 1 on top of figure 2 here for you guys so that you can take a look at it. It's obvious what they did here, right? The curve wasn't just flattened, it was done. It's going down. And so they went out into the healthy population, the asymptomatic population, and they increased testing 25%. That way, the total number of cases never dipped down. So the key thing that we're going to have to do as truthers is watch the case fatality rate, because the rate of new cases just doesn't matter. And they talk about it right here in the study. The estimated hospital CFR for ages 50 to 69 has declined by an order of magnitude, while that for ages 70 to 79 has declined by a factor of 3. The reasons for this extremely welcome trend are not entirely clear. Yes, they are. Much of the reduction over the last few weeks is very likely due to a widening of the testing regime to include milder cases of disease, with more cases now being found outside hospitals. Nevertheless, a good part of the decline is likely real. Most countries have seen a decline in hospital CFR over time. And we were looking at the case fatality rate, and I'm wondering, why is it going down even when we control for the expanded age of testing? And I found at the bottom of this paragraph, quote, the overall deaths were pushed up by the spread of infections to care homes, residents of which accounted at the point for 40 to 50% of total deaths. And just look at these numbers since then. The infection rates have dropped significantly. If you're below age 70, 0.09. 0.09. And at the end of the day, they found to date, the average age of death was 82. And in only 6% of cases did the death not involve another comorbidity. And all this led them to declare, in the absence of a change in trends, it seems likely that the epidemic will peter out after 1,000 or so more deaths, implying an overall infection fatality rate of 0.06 of the population, 0.04 if you exclude the CV deaths from care homes. This is broadly comparable to excess deaths from an influenza. And I'm hammering this point home for everybody because we're seeing these news reports of skyrocketing numbers of CV, but you have to really dig when you find it maintains daily fatalities. Deaths and hospitalizations continue to decline. Decline in new U.S. deaths may be temporary for fear, but if that's temporary, then why's the comfort gone? Where'd the mercy go? What happened to the hospitals the Army had to set up? No. We're not going to fall for that again, are we, folks? I mean, this entire thing has been a statistical nightmare, but I think we're beyond being manipulated with numbers at this point, aren't we? I don't know. However, I did find something else strange coming out of Spain. CV traces found in March 19th. Sewage sample, Spanish study shows. Not March 2020. Spanish virologists have found traces of the novel CV in a sample of Barcelona wastewater collected on March 2019. 9 months before the CV-19 disease was identified in China, the University of Barcelona said on Friday. And this is crazy because we've really got to look into this. When I was looking into the trade deal that we signed with the Chinese, it turns out that they made sure there was a clause in there that in the event of a natural disaster or other unforeseeable event, they didn't have to hold up to their end of the bargain. And as of yet, they haven't, and they're blaming the CV lockdown. So it seems awfully coincidental with their timing, right? There's a lot of work to be done on sniffing out the location and the time at which this came into our reality. Because if this thing was in sewage in Spain in 2019, early 2019, we have no idea where it originated. But let's move on from that to the next thing that they hate, HCQ. You guys remember a little while back when I was covering the smear tactics that were being used against HCQ, which was the most bizarre thing in the world. Who had ever seen a wrap-up smear done on a thing instead of a person? But there was a paper that was published in the Lancet, and it raised all this controversy about these possible cardiac problems that HCQ caused, and it stopped in its tracks many studies that were being done about HCQ at the time. Well, what you're looking at right here is the Lancet's retraction. It turned out that this wrap-up smear on HCQ was just exactly what we called it was, and that it had been data manipulated. Let's get into it. First of all, like we said, this study stopped all research on HCQ, and because of that was highly detrimental. I don't even know that we will be able to quantify what harm they did with these studies. The company's name was Surgisphere, and surprise, surprise, it's based in Chicago. And they're refusing to release their data, but they're saying that they're arranging a non-disclosure agreement that will provide the authors of the New England Journal of Medicine paper with the data. And it's funny because even Science Magazine, when they report this, do they report it that it was a wrap-up smear on HCQ? No. They say that the reason why this study's bad is because it gives proponents of HCQ fodder. The proponents of HCQ haven't been looking for fodder. We just wanted people to get help. Meanwhile, the questions swirling around the Lancet paper have left leaders of the halted chloroquine trials weighing whether to restart. The problem is, we are left with all the damage that has been done, says White, a co-investigator on a trial of HCQ for CV patients that was halted at the request of UK regulators last week. Headlines proclaiming deadly effects will make it hard to recruit patients to key studies, he says. The whole world thinks now that these drugs are poisonous. The WHO's paused their Solidarity trial, based off of this horrible data set, but they want to assure people that the WHO didn't make any kind of value judgment on the use of HCQ. But some say the WHO had a knee-jerk reaction to a questionable study. This is a drug that has been used for decades. It's not like we know nothing about its safety. Wow, well, doesn't that just sound familiar, guys? They got it. And so the researcher involved in the 2 retracted papers was terminated from his job, and that's all well and good, but it's like they say a key role in involving a little-known company that has ignited a firestorm of controversy. I think the better question is, how did a little-known company's data become amplified worldwide, and before their data had even been checked? In the meantime, while the wrap-up smears on HCQ are falling apart, we have a study on HCQ that comes out recently that is actually positive. Treatment with HCQ cut death rate significantly in CV patients from the Henry Ford Heath Systems study. Now, how reliable is this? It forced CNN to cover it. So, pretty darn reliable if it's forcing CNN to cover it. Am I right? Now, we've talked about this many times about how HCQ is a zinc ionophore and it is not the actual antiviral agent in the treatment plan with Zelensky. However, they do explain in this study why HCQ and HCQ with azithromycin does have a positive effect. It also changes the pH and the polarity, and so it does have an antiviral effect. It's just not nearly as effective as when combined with zinc, which this study showing these significant benefits also did not include zinc. Without zinc, they found that HCQ alone decreased the mortality hazard ratio by 66%, and when combined with azithromycin, by 71%. And this study is just a stepping stone to the truth because Dr. Zelenko's method clearly has zinc as the centerpiece of the antiviral, and they're not there yet. So let's sum it all up, guys. HCQ, all the papers that were against it have been debunked now. The number of infected people is way higher than initially thought, meaning that the case fatality rate is extremely lower than initially thought. And so the corporate media has decided that they are going to only report on new cases, regardless of what the fatality is. And I want to stress that this is just assuming that their numbers that they give us are real and true, which is a giant leap of faith. These are numbers that report in Hong Kong. They have a total of 1, 2, 4, 3 cases and only 7 deaths. A city of 7.4 million. Yet in New York, you have 22,593 deaths and a population of 8.399 million. But anyways, guys, I hope some of the information inside the video helped you. I hope you guys have a great 4th of July. God bless y'all. God bless America. Catch y'all next time.
They did the epidemic entirely like Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia. You know, they took their experience and actually prepared, and so they moved a lot faster. So we, we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is will get attention this time.
We'll have to prepare for the next one. That will get attention this time.